Okay, an interview with Mr. Meyer Sheff at the 69th Armory, New York City, 9 January 2001. Interview with Lieutenant Colonel Robert von Hassel, videographer Mr. Michael Akey. Meyer.
I hear you.
Tell me where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born on the Lower East Side in Manhattan, and I grew up the first 15 years in Manhattan. Then we moved to Brooklyn. My family moved to Brooklyn. And from there, right after Pearl Harbor, I enlisted. I came out of the service. I was already married, so I got housing in Queens, and I've been there ever since. So
you joined up right after Pearl Harbor?
I just got through telling him, I don't know if you heard. I was quite a reader as a kid, and I read about trench warfare, where some sergeant blew a whistle and everybody jumped out of the trench and they were mowed down, a bloodbath. And to my way of thinking, the generals still had the trench warfare syndrome, thinking of running that war, and I was not going to be part of that bloodbath. Because I also read that no army moved more than 500 yards in either direction during the whole war. So I went down to Whitehall Street, told him I wanted to join the Army Air Corps because I was a mechanic. My father was a mechanic. I figured I'd work on airplanes. I had to take a test. I did very well, and he took me into the Army Air Corps, and from there on in, buck private and all the way up.
So where was your first duty station in the Air Corps?
Selfridge Field, Detroit.
Technical training?
Say that again?
What type of training did you do at Selfridge?
I didn't do any training. I just got through telling him, the Army being what it is, while I was being processed in Fort Dix, somebody looked at my record and said, you did extremely well on a test. There's no point in sending you to school. Mm-hmm. They bypassed me on the assumption that when I get to the next base, I will join the team and I'll become a crew sergeant and, work myself up. And when I got to Selfridge Field, I wound up hauling coal, cleaning out the kitchen grease trap, fire duty at night. You had to walk up and down to make sure there's no fires at the tents and camps. And I was miserable. And I explained to the captain. They told me I would be on a line. He says, I'm sorry, son, but if you don't go to the Army schools, you're considered an idiot, and you're going to be doing this the rest of the war. And I was sorely disappointed. One day I passed the bulletin board and I saw an advertisement, wanted glider pilots. You had to volunteer. And the only way I can get out of that outfit was to sign up to be a glider pilot. And that's what I did, and that became my career.
So tell me about, where did you do your training for glider pilot?
Oh, quite a few places. Lone Oak, Arkansas, Blacklands, outside of Austin, Texas. And the bulk of my training was at Dalhart, Texas, in the panhandle of Texas, right near the New Mexico border. Flat as far, you can see the horizon, make 360. Nothing but tumbleweeds. And that's where I did, that's where I graduated. And of course, by that time, I was a staff sergeant. You had to be a staff sergeant. So I was promoted from buck private to staff sergeant for training. And then apparently, from what I hear tell, you're not allowed to send a pilot overseas unless he was an officer. So they came out with a rank called flight officer rank. A temporary rank. I have here my orders for that. It says the appointment will continue in force for the duration of the war and 6 months thereafter. They don't have that rank anymore.
No. Nowadays we call them warrant officers.
Yeah. Well, they had warrant officers then too.
They kind of roll
Yeah.
it together. What did your training consist of?
The first phase was in single-engine Cub tailorcraft. I don't remember how many hours, but we had to learn how to fly, and I remember the first lesson we got. The instructor took me up about 5,000 feet, and prior to that he says, I'm going to show you that this airplane is smarter than you are. It flies better than you can. Took me up to 5,000 feet and put it into a spin. And we're going down this way. He says, I'm going to let go of the controls and you don't touch anything. And came right out. A very stable airplane. I graduated from there. Then we went into sailplane. I tell you, that's the greatest thrill to going. You're flying and all you hear is you're riding air currents, thermals. I don't remember how many months we were at that. Couldn't have been too long, maybe a month or two. And then we went into advanced training, cargo gliders, carrying troops, ammunition, guns, cannons, things like that, jeeps. And I graduated that. I became a flight officer.
What kind of gliders were you flying? Wacos, horses?
That's interesting. We trained on CG-4s, which is the American gliders. And when we get to the part when I was at the D-Day invasion, I flew a Horsa glider. But that's an interesting story by itself. So when we get there, so that's the training we had.
Mm-hmm. Where'd you go after that?
Overseas, England.
Mm-hmm.
And then come D-Day, I remember they locked the base. Nobody in and nobody out. And some officer came around and said, go see your pastor, your rabbi, your priest, whatever, because we're taking off. Next morning, we come out for briefing, where we're going to land, what we're going to find. And I come out to the flight line, number one glider, a Horsa glider, and I was the pilot. I almost died. I ran back to operations. I says, how come he put me on a Horsa glider? I never flew one. He says, but we have you on record as a co-pilot. I says, and I'm thinking way back what happened, and I remember one Sunday, everybody was running to London and whatever, and I didn't have any money because I sent a lot of it home. So I hung around the airfield, and the British were flying Horsa gliders. I walked up to one of them and I said, can I go for the ride? He says, yeah. So I sat in the co-pilot seat. Now, if you're in a pilot seat, you got there's a Form 1, if I remember. I don't remember. Is it Form 1?
I think so.
Form 1, I had to enter my name in there because I'm sitting in a co-pilot seat. They used that to say that I was trained for a pilot. I tell you, I almost died. And then I'm thinking, I'm standing in front of this big monster. It's a big, big, big glider. I think it holds 36 people. And I'm looking at it. I said, a glider is a glider. Okay, the controls, things like that. But I says, I had one saving grace. I was the first one on the lead. So when I have to make a landing in France, I'll be the first one down, because in a glider, once you land, you can saturate a field. Two gliders can saturate a field where you can't land because wherever they stop, that's where they stop. So I went and I flew the mission. I ran into some hedgerows, but I'm alive.
Who were you flying that day? Who were you transporting?
82nd Airborne or one of first? I don't remember. One of those.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember where your landing zone was?
St. Mary Glees. supposed to land there, or we were near there, St. Mary Glees, yeah.
So you're probably flying 82nd then?
I guess so, I don't remember. It was, I know they were all infantry, probably 82nd.
So what was it like taking off and crossing the channel?
I don't know, you're so busy. First of all, I'm flying a plane glider I never flew before, so I was a busy guy because the characteristics are not the same as the CG-4. You know, it's tremendous, big, and you had to keep away from the draft, the downdraft. I was so busy. All I noticed was when I crossed the channel, I saw a million boats, you know, heading towards the shore. And I tell you, we were supposed to release when we got to a certain point. You got a signal from the tow plane. I'm flying and I'm looking down and I see the corner of my eye, everybody's letting go before they even got the signal. So right away I saw in my mind, they want to get down there first before somebody saturates the field. And you know what I did? I released and I went into a steep dive, really a steep dive, because I wanted to get ahead of everybody else. And then I leveled off. I was flying so fast that it wouldn't go down. You know, I kept sailplaning. And I went over one hedge, another hedge. I think I went over the third hedge and I hit the ground and slammed into another hedgerow. And got out, worked my way back to the beach where they took me back to England. And what I remember about that is there's shells were coming over from the Americans. They were shelling the mainland, the beach. And every time I heard a shot, I dropped to the floor. And so there was another infantryman next to me. He says, if you hear it, don't worry about it. He said, the one that gets you, you'll never hear. So I just kept walking right to the beach.
And then what happened once you were back in England?
Went back to training. And my last mission was the Bastogne mission. And on that one, I was tail end Charlie, the last CG-4. I asked the guy what I was flying. He says blood plasma, but I didn't believe him. They looked like gasoline jerry cans. Although I didn't smell any gasoline, so I don't know. And we were towed, and we're approaching Bastogne, and I see a cloud of flak, anti-aircraft fire. And I said to myself, I'm not going to make it. Because I was there were a couple of groups ahead of us, so they're zeroing in. Every time a new group came over, they kept zeroing in. My outfit had, I think, 95% casualties. I became a prisoner of war then, and a couple of my friends were killed, a couple of friends were POWs, and I spent the rest of the war in Germany.
You became a POW because the glider landed outside the
Bastogne? Yeah, it never reached Bastogne.
Tell me about being captured.
Well, when I landed, they were shooting at me because I can hear the bullets are ripping through the glider material that's made out of material and pipes. And I was concentrating so hard on my, there's all forest there. And you have to be lucky to find an opening where you can land your glider. And I came down, and I stepped out of the glider, and I'm looking in the snow. I see somebody shooting at me. The snow is popping up. So I dropped to the floor. I held up my carbine. I had a 45 in the carbine. I held my hands up, and a couple of German soldiers came out of the woods towards me. And I saw they had the SS on their label, collar. And they started a fight over the 45 I was carrying. They wanted the 45. then a captain, I think a Hauptmann came, and he settled the argument because he took it. He took the gun, and he sent me to an interrogation post. On the way to the interrogation point, I was Jewish, so I pulled off my dog tags, which had his H on it, and I threw it, dropped it on the ground ahead of me because I already knew what the score was. And I wound up at the first interrogation point. On the way there, I'm feeling a peculiar wetness in my forearm. And I looked down, I opened up, and I had either a bullet wound or a flak wound, and it went right through the muscle. It didn't touch the bone, but the scar, like a flower, like an opening of a flower, the skin. So they sent the medic over me. He had a pair of tweezers, and he's digging in there, looking to see if he can find a bullet or whatever. Didn't find anything. Put on a Band-Aid or something. I don't remember what he did. And I went to one interrogation point. Then he took me to another interrogation point. And I had those propeller and wings insignia on it. So they sent all the Air Corps men or Air Force men to one side. Apparently, what I learned later on, they were looking for navigators. They wanted to talk to navigators, where they came from, I don't know what they had in mind. So guy asked me a question. I says, I don't know. I says, I don't fly power, bombers or anything like that. He says, you better tell me because I'm going to send you outside. By the way, this is December 27th. It's cold. He said, I'm going to send you outside naked until you tell me more. I says, I don't know. So he spoke to somebody in German. He says, so I thought they were going to take me out and take off my clothes. But no, he just took me outside, and I joined a couple of other prisoners, POWs. And then they started to walk us towards Cologne. There was no food, no water. If you wanted to eat or drink, you had to pick up the snow and put it in your mouth. The trouble with that is the snow had a lot of cordite, whatever they use for ammunition, soot. And everybody was drinking it. I was too. And we passed a farm, and somebody would dig up some frozen carrots from the ground, things like that. And all of a sudden, I'm getting dysentery, and the guy ahead of me is getting dysentery. Now, this guy was a big guy. He died in 3 days. His water just came out of him. And I figured I'm next. So I started screaming and hollering at the officer. I told him, I'm an officer. I figured, what the hell can I lose? I says, I'm an officer, and I want you to obey the Geneva Convention, and I'm sick, and you got to put me in the hospital. And I'm screaming at him. What have I got to lose? So he sent me to the doctor. They put a green tag that said crank. That's what it said. I think it means sick, cranky. Okay. And they put me in a hospital, and would you believe they gave me opium? I think it was opium to stop the crapping, all stop the water. In 3 days it stopped. However, there were other GIs there that were having their toes and feet amputated. The reason for that is we had to walk in the snow day, and then we have to stop off at night. But I remember my training when all the other guys were playing crap in the back. They had big room, and it must have been 1 million guys there. And I was a good little boy. I was a good soldier. I listened. One of the things I remembered, he says, if your feet get wet at night, no matter how cold it is, take off your socks, put it under your armpit, and in the morning put it on, which is what I did. These guys didn't. And they lost their toes and their feet and their legs. So it paid off for me. Oh, God. Those are the memories I have of that.
So after that, they took you to a Luftstalag?
Stalag. Stalag 7. It was somewhere near the Dresden-Leipzig area. I just don't know where, because I left the hospital, and I got the name of the hospital in my records here. And the Americans were advancing, so we left there and we walked all the way to Munich, Moosburg they called it, Munich. And that was a 2-week walk. Walked all the way. And when I got there, that was Stalag 4F, and that's where I stayed until I was liberated. Stalag 4F.
What was life like in the Stalag?
Well, for one thing, they had bunks, you know. It was so cold, so little heat, that we slept together, 2 men. I never took off my clothes in the 3 months I was there, 3.5 months. Never took it off, and neither anybody else, because it was so cold. Had nothing to do. They wouldn't let us go out on work details because the Geneva Convention says officers are not allowed to work, so all the GIs managed to work on details and do some business with the locals, you know. And the food was, they had potato peeling soup made out of potatoes that were peeled. And then they had bread, 1 kilo bread. It came in 1 kilo size. It had a date stamped on it, and it was made from wood, not wood and flour. And I just had him. I want to leave this with you. I cut this out of paper, and that's what I had. The only thing I remember by the way, it tasted pretty good, but it left you flatulent. You gas all day long. Terrible, terrible. Keep it.
Ersatz bread, huh?
They called it Holzbrot. Holzbrot. Something like that. Holz means wood, and bread means whatever. So it's wood, literally wood bread, but it's made out of processed sawdust. Not all of it. They use it as a filler. First it was 1 kilo for 4 men. As the war wore on, it was 1 kilo for 8 men. As it went on a little more, it was 1 kilo for 12 men. Now, if you have 1 kilo of bread for 12 men, somebody has to slice it. The guy that sliced it, believe me, spent time measuring exactly, because you're hungry. You know, every little grain has value. The problem was the guy who cut the bread got the last piece. You understand what's going on? And then there were a lot of people. Then the Red Cross packages started coming in. Again, two prisoners on 1 package, and then 4. Towards the end, I guess they were stealing it, all of that stuff. But the cigarettes was what you traded for bread. And with the German guards, they were pretty good. They were old men. They were farmers, so they were pretty good. But the young guys, they'd get you out 4 in the morning for roll call. 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. What the hell do they call it? Used to holler in, raus, metaus. There was another word for roll call, I don't remember the word. So they make you stand outside while they're counting, you're freezing. But the older men, they were pretty good. Generally pretty good. So we spent our time waiting for the only thing of interest, somewhere in that compound, they had a radio. And there were the higher-ranking officers were in a certain building, and outside they had a map of the Europe with the lines of the Americans and the Germans. I never did find out who or what and where, but we used to pass by to find out what's happening and how we're looking, so it looked good. And then another interesting thing is they make whiskey. The Red Cross packages had prunes in them. I don't know how they did it, but they wound up with tin cans. They made little fires. I guess they distilled the prunes and they wound up with whiskey. That's strange. I never got over that, making whiskey.
Did you have any of it?
No, I wasn't part of the inner group and I didn't care. I'm not a drinking guy. I didn't care for that. I could imagine it was rot gut or practically pure alcohol, I would imagine.
So what was the day you were liberated like?
Got up one morning, not a God in sight. And about a half hour later, I hear the rumbling of tanks. And in about 20 minutes, the Americans rolled in with the tanks, and we were liberated. However, they wouldn't let you out. You would think, here, we're free, we'll go running around. No way, nobody moves. That is, nobody leaves the area. They had Red Cross wagons come in with big pots of chicken a la king. They gave you a plate and said, get on the line, chow line. As they passed by, they put in some chicken a la king, and they said, you can eat all you want, but only what you have on a plate. You want more? Go back on the line. The reason for that is you can eat yourself to death. And by the way, I also heard, I didn't see it, I heard that a couple of guys escaped to the nearby farm. They captured a pig, they roasted it, ate the whole pig, and died from overeating. I never saw this, but this is what I heard, so maybe there's truth in it, I don't know. Interesting experience.
And what happened to you after that?
The first thing they did was they shaved my head, our heads, and they sprinkled, I guess it was DD powder all over us. I don't know what it was, something. And then they sent us to a camp called, there were names of cigarettes. I was sent to Camp Lucky Strike. And this is where they fed us. It was a fattening up camp. Walk around, eat all you want, as often as you want. And then I guess when you gained a little weight and looked a little better, they shipped me back home. Then they sent us to, for R&R, for returnees only, Atlantic City, a hotel for 3 or 4 days with your wife. And we got there, and then I went home. And then after I got home, I put in, after I had my own shop for a while, I got tired of that, and I wanted to become a teacher. So I applied for a teaching position. I had to go back to college again, take courses, how to teach. And I took an awful reduction in pay. And I had 2 and 3 jobs full of brush men and things like all kinds of things. And then it occurred to me to join the reserves. Of course, I can get 2 weeks pay in 1 week, 1 weekend a month. So I joined the reserves.
Let's hold on that for a minute. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Your experiences in the reserves. But before we do that, let's go back to
Yeah.
World War II. Before the invasion and then afterwards, you had time to get out among the English people. Some leaves.
Oh yeah.
What was that
Well,
like?
I avoided London because it was much too expensive and I couldn't afford it. You know, the horrors and the nightclubs and the pony steaks. They called them pony steaks. I don't know what the hell kind of meat it was. So I ran to two places. One in a place called Weston-super-Mare, and the other was Cardiff. And Cardiff is a beautiful, beautiful town. It seemed like it escaped the war. And what I was impressed with, it seemed like everybody had red hair. I don't know why, I just remember it. And beautiful speaking voices, and beautiful singers. They sang beautifully. And that's what struck me most. And I did the locals. The guys sat down at the pubs, and I talked to the women, and walked around, and nothing much. I didn't get involved too much. But they were nice. Very nice. Very nice.
Do you ever feel like you got treated differently because you were wearing wings as opposed to all the other Americans?
Well, they were looking for we had pink pants, what they call pinks in those days. And the girls, if they saw you in pinks, they mobbed you, So I didn't go for that sort of thing.
Pinks being a sign of an officer?
Yeah, sure. And no less wearing wings. So.
How did you get along with the other Army Air Force pilots? You were stationed at an air base, weren't you?
Oh yeah, of course. No problem.
Any sort of differences between the glider pilots and the service pilots and the fighter pilots?
I was with the 9th Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
The 9th Air Force had the bombers, and we had the Troop Carrier Command within the 9th Air Force. I was in a Troop Carrier Command, and we didn't have any. I didn't get to see many of the pilots because they were the power pilot, the tow pilots, the C-47s. They said that they worked their end, and we hung around with the glider pilots because we were always in training. We're always, taking off. You just didn't sit around. We were always in training. Taking off, landing, loading, and God knows what all. No problem. Good.
A lot of training accidents while you were in training?
I remember two. Dalhousie, Texas. We were segregated into groups. One instructor had 6 or 8 student glider pilots. And this guy was he was a second lieutenant. He was an eager beaver guy, and he always wanted to be the first on line early in the morning, the first one to take off on a training flight. So what would happen, 6 guys would sit in there, one guy would sit in the controls, then another guy would sit at the controls, take off, sort of thing like that. While we're in it and ready to take off, another officer of high, I think it was a first lieutenant, commandeered the first flight. He made the second lieutenant and the glider pilots out because he wanted to be the first one off. Believe it or not, we're talking about Dalhousie, Texas, semi-desert, not a tree in sight, tumbleweeds. In the middle of all that, there was a brick building. You call it a building. It's like a shed made out of brick. Something happened on a flight, and this guy ran into that brick building shed and killed all the pilots. So, luck, number 1. Number 2, in training, and we were in Laurinburg-Maxton Air Base. I don't remember if it was North or South Carolina. Fayetteville? Is that somewhere? I don't know whether it's North or South Carolina. North Carolina? Laurinburg-Maxton Air Base. I was on a training flight there, and one of these landings where somebody saturated the field, and I ran into something and I banged up. Nothing big. Hardly worth mentioning, really. And the only time I really slammed in is when on the D-Day flight into France. I ran into a hedgerow. They had to chop us out. By the way, the glider is made out of wood. All wood. So when I slammed into the hedgerow, all the wood splintered. I had a mouthful of dirt. They chopped us out. The troops were all right because, I wound up this way. They came out and they chopped us out. I don't remember who my co-pilot was. I never saw the guy in my life. That's one of those things. So that was the only accidents I ever had, near deaths.
Let's talk about the D-Day flight again for a moment.
Yeah.
When you hit the ground somewhere near Saint-Mary
Right.
it must have been very disoriented when you got chopped out. I mean,
Yeah.
most of the paratroopers were. They didn't know where anybody was.
Well, they didn't land at the same time the gliders were. That was a different ball game. Not a different ball game. At a different time. I think it was much earlier than when we got there. I saw no paratroopers at all. At least where I landed, I saw no paratroopers.
So you had a pretty good idea where you were going once you got
Oh
out?
yeah, they told us we were going to during the briefing. They said we're going to St. Mary Glees.
And then after you got out of the glider, after you landed,
I didn't know where I was. All I know is I saw cows in their fields munching on the grass. I saw farmers walking like nothing was happening. An unbelievable sight. A couple of farmers and maybe a woman. I'm not sure. I saw one walking down the road, just like a Sunday stroll, with all this going on, gliders coming in all over the place.
did you have any
What
trouble
a scene.
working your way back to the beach?
No.
I think we're about done with this. Interview with Mr. Meyer Sheff on 9 January 2000, New York City. Meyer, tell me, after the war you joined the
Reserves.
The reserves. Okay, when was that?
When the Air Corps, about the time the Air Corps became the United States Air Force, I think it was 48 or 49?
47.
47? It wasn't much later than 47. If I have to guess, it's 48 or 49. There was they sent us to a place on Leonard Street, down on the Wall Street area there. I went to a couple of meetings there. From there, I guess they closed up the place, whatever they did. We were sent over to Mitchell Field, and we trained there for a while. And from Mitchell Field, I was sent to the 106th.
Okay, at Mitchell, about how long were you at Mitchell Field?
How long?
Mm-hmm. Less than a year?
Oh, less than a year. Much less than a year. I would say, I'm guessing, maybe 6 months.
And what kind of duties did you have at Mitchell?
I don't know. We sat in classes. I just don't remember. It was, there wasn't much going on. They were organizing all the time, and apparently they were changing people in charge, so everything was in flux. From one weekend to the other, it was a different ball game.
Were you assigned to the troop carrier wing that was at Mitchell?
No, there was no troop carrier wing.
Okay. And
If there was, I would have been in it. So
maybe that was later. There was one there during the 1950s. What about?
oh, Floyd Bennett Field. That's where I picked up the 106th.
Right, we're coming to that.
Oh, now I remember.
Now
We're
coming
going
to
back
that.
many years. Go ahead.
So this time you're still in pinks and greens, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what kind of feeling was going on about the fact that the Air Force now was a separate service?
Well, everybody was put into a slot for what he was going to do. being I had mechanical training and mechanical schooling, and I was a teacher of auto mechanics in the high schools, they put me in as a motor vehicle transport officer. I think that's the title, I don't remember. And I kept records. By this time I'm a second lieutenant, because they made me second lieutenant after I was liberated, they made me automatic second lieutenant. And I gave classes, how to repair and what to look for and how to handle emergency situations when it came to automotive and trucks and things like that.
Was this with the 106 or when you were still in mission?
No, this is not Mitchell. This is Floyd Bennett Field.
Okay.
Floyd Bennett.
And so was it Floyd Bennett Field that you joined the 106th?
Yeah.
And at that time they were a light bombardment squadron?
I think so, yeah.
The flying...
No, I think they were ATC, MAC, Military Air Command, Military Airlift Command, MAC, MAC. That's what they were. Now that I'm getting recalled.
And what kind of aircraft were they operating?
I don't know, C-46s? I really don't remember, because I was in the motor pool, so I wasn't involved with any aircraft anymore. There was no more glider pilots. I was what the MOS was 1026, and there was no more 1026s. It was wiped out. So I got a job as a transportation officer. And from there, I stayed, and I became first lieutenant. And then, when I was sent to then we moved to West Hampton, out on the island, way out on the island. It seemed like I was ready for promotion, but the motor transportation officer, I think the highest rank was either a first lieutenant or a captain. So I was being promoted out of my position. So what do? So they had the table of organization called for a disaster control officer. I think at that time was ABC, atomic, chemical, biological war, atomic, biological, chemical warfare. Nobody wanted the job. Here I come along, and I take the job. Very interesting job. I loved it. I had to go to school out in Denver, and I learned about atomic warfare, biological warfare, chemical warfare, and my job was to, in case of an attack, an atomic attack, the commanding officer would ask me how long the troops can stay out, be exposed to the gamma rays and things like that, and the poison gas, and I was in charge of training how to put on the gas mask, and hazardous material, handling hazardous material. Fascinating subject.
And about what years were these?
I guess I spent the last 4 or 5 years as a disaster control officer. What was I finished in 72? So maybe 68. I really don't know. I'm guessing.
Yeah. And you became the disaster control officer after the unit moved to West Hampton?
Yes.
And how long after the unit had moved to West Hampton did you become the disaster control officer?
I don't remember. I just simply don't remember. We're talking about, I went to every weekend, once a month. Then I went to 2 weeks of summer encampment, and then I went to schooling over and above the 2 weeks. I was a school teacher, so I was able to do this without loss of pay.
Where were you teaching school?
Are you familiar with New York, Queens? Thomas Edison High School? I was there for 20 years, 22 years. I was a shop teacher.
So you were in the Air National Guard pretty much from 1948 to
Right,
1970,
right.
72 or 74?
I think, about somewhere in 1972, they had what's called what was happening. All the old timers, the World War II veterans, were holding the top slots. They weren't moving. The new guys coming in as first and second lieutenants didn't stay long because everything was blocked. So in order to make room for which makes sense to me, I understood that. In order to make sense for these, so they can keep their younger officers, and the ladder is open for being promoted, so all the old timers were phased out. I think that was 1972. '78, 1078. But that's from the Air Force. 72, yeah. Combat Support Squadron. Dates, I'm not too sure of dates because I'm 82 years old now, so.
You never thought about being recertified or getting another rating? You were a glider pilot. After the war, you never pursued becoming
No, I wanted to, when I enlisted, I was single. When I left, I had a wife, 2 kids, 1 kid. I remember 1 or 2 kids by that time. And my wife didn't care for Army life or the military, so I left.
So you never went back to,
No.
you never thought of becoming another type of pilot? Imagine by 1972, there must have been a whole bunch of new kids walking around the unit asking you what the little G on your wing stood for.
Yeah, most thought I was a gunner, and I had to explain. Yeah.
But you saw a lot of Air Force history there. Do you remember any of the kinds of planes that the 106 flew?
They weren't bombers, that's for sure. They were transport planes. C-46s, I remember, and maybe there's a couple other planes, I don't know.
Weren't there any aero-medical evac units?
They had a mission there for aerovac. I remember now that you mention it, and that didn't last long, because then it became air-sea rescue and things like that.
But before they became aerospace rescue for a while, weren't they fighter interceptor?
No, not while I was there. There's a Jersey outfit that was an interceptor group. 514th, something like that, I don't remember. Was there a 514? Do you remember?
Well, there was a 514.
In Jersey.
Yeah, there's a 514 troop carrier group that was at Mitchell Field.
I was never in the 514s.
And I know the 102nd at one point flew F-106s.
There was none of that when I was with there was none of that at all. Because I would have known that. How can you miss a thing like that?
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly military airlift command from when my time was there.
Mm-hmm. So what were your typical drills like?
I was teaching. I ran classes and paperwork, and I had to train my staff sergeants and putting on these clothes for going into chemical clouds and things like that.
Were these on weekends or?
Weekends, yes.
And
Of course, then during summer encampment for 2 weeks, that was the whole training thing. That was my slot for training.
right, and you would perform your annual trainings right there on the base?
Yeah, and then we have a inspector would come along, and we'd go through a whole program of accidents and things like that, taking off, and aerial strikes and things like that. And dropping a bomb somewhere 60 miles away, I had to keep the commanding officer. I had to find out the wind speed, the wind direction, what the measurements were for the radiation. Then I had to sit down and figure on a graph how long I can send out a group from certain time to certain time, and then as the time wore on, the radiation decreased very slowly, of course, but then there's casualties, and there was radiation sickness.
Well, this was in the late 60s and early 70s on
Yeah.
Long Island. Was there a great deal of concern about this? Did people think of it as a real possibility?
If there was, I wasn't aware of it. If there was, I was not aware of it. Of course, if you're talking about the newspapers and or certain organizations, they're making a big stink out of it, but I have a way of looking at things. I remember reading about the balance of terror, I think was the expression they used.
Mhm.
A can have a lot of weapons, B has a lot of weapons. We pushed what they call second strike. In other words, we don't start anything, we respond. We react rather than act. So we had what's called a balance of terror, and I felt that nothing's going to happen. And so it came to pass. But a lot of people, especially the young people, they were greatly concerned. Building if you remember the craze of building bomb shelters, when was that, 50s or 60s?
Early 60s.
Early 60s.
And, I'm just wondering, being that you were on the air base on Long Island, near Bethpage and Calverton, where Grumman...
It was near, it was, past there,
Right in the middle of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, that's right.
I saw a targeting list once for...
Oh, did you?
Yeah, a map of what the nuclear spread would have been if the
Yeah.
Soviets had attacked Long Island, and basically...
If the wind was blowing that way.
Yeah, it was blowing right out towards West Hampton. Do you remember when the Beaumont missiles were installed out at West Hampton?
I never knew there were any missiles
Unmanned
up there.
missiles?
I never saw it, never was aware of it. Maybe the regular people that were there, regulars that worked all year round up there. But if there was, I didn't know about it, and I was not a privy to it at all.
From 1948 to 1972, you must have seen a lot of changes in the unit. How was it different in the beginning from when you left?
I went with the punches. Whatever came, I adjusted to what it was, and I had no real feelings about it, and I just accepted what came.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any call-ups, like for Korea?
Yeah. No, the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were called active duty. I think it was 1 or 2 days. There was a recall. We were actually recalled. And 2 days later, it was what I call it was a DEFCON 3 or something like that, defense condition. I don't remember what it was, because by that time I had to get busy, preparation. So I know we were in some sort of a DEFCON at that time.
So you were called up and alerted and...
Yeah. It was ready to go. Yeah, they were packing things, and I had to fill out a bunch of papers like you wouldn't believe.
Were you concerned at that point that the war...
I wasn't. No. maybe I got a fatalistic attitude. I don't know what it is.
And when you first came in, there weren't a lot of blacks and women in the unit, were there?
No, none at all.
When did that start to change?
I don't know. It's so gradual that I never even thought of it. I was never involved in that sort of thing, so I have no experience at all.
When the unit had its first woman officer assigned? Captain Parsons back in the 1950s, flight nurse.
Nurse, flight nurse. I don't know the name, but we always had flight nurses, so that was no surprise to me at all.
What about the transition from the old Army uniform to the Air Force uniform? How did that go over?
No problem. No, just all blues. As a matter of fact, I liked it better.
How come?
I don't know. It's blue is my favorite color. So,
Was there a lot of mixing and matching there? You know, some people in this, some people in
no, our commanding officer was pretty hot on the subject. First of all, they gave us a clothing allowance. I don't remember how much money was involved, so everybody ran down to the PX and got the overcoats and the blues and the summer tans and the blues. We spent all our money, or I did anyways, on the clothes.
You seem to be a pretty good unit.
Yes.
Do you recall anything about the federal evaluations of the period?
None at all.
Did you get inspections in your...
Oh, yeah. Oh,
in
yeah.
the motor pool?
Not at the motor pool, when I was a disaster control officer.
Yeah, and how rigorous were those inspections?
Very. I was so nervous, I came up with wrong answers. You know, I had to sit down with the graph and, oh, God.
And your inspectors would be somebody from, like, the Gaining Air Force headquarters?
You know, they came, I don't know where they came from,
They were regular
Washington.
Air Force stuff.
Yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tough?
Oh, they were tough. They were tough.
Did you think you were in one of the better units, or was there an esprit de corps or pride in the unit?
I didn't detect that at all. Strangely enough, I did not detect that at all. It seemed like his job had to be done, and they did it. I didn't detect any of the gung-ho spirit at all. Not at all. Not like the Marines or something like that.
Were there a lot of changes in the air base over the years?
Yeah, there were changes. You adjusted to them. You simply adjusted to them. You read the new regulations and...
Well, imagine when you first got out to West Hampton Beach, wasn't that an old deserted Army airfield?
Yeah.
And did it take a lot to get the base up and running?
Yeah. Well, they were the regulars. It was Air National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
And they had people there the whole week on a regular basis. We just came out there for weekends, one weekend a month. But I know they were always building and painting and repairing and things like that, and trucks running in and out. It was a busy place, but they did a good job.
And I think for a while didn't the Air Force have a regular squadron there too? Fighter squadron there for a while?
I think so. I didn't see too much activity there, but once in a while we'd see some of these fighter planes go up. There weren't many of them. I didn't see too many of them, unless they didn't do anything on weekends, I don't know. Maybe they did a lot of flying during the week. Because they were regular. That was regular Air Force. We were just weekend warriors.
Was there a concern back during Korea that you might get called up?
If there was, I didn't detect it. If there was, I did not detect it. Not at all.
Any other memorable personalities, commanders?
No. Just ordinary run-of-the-mill men. Friendly. Go to the old club, have a good time, talk, yak, tell jokes, whatever, and go home.
Any particular anecdotes stick in your mind about
None
the Naval
particularly,
service?
no. I'm not into the bar scene, so I
Yeah.
didn't go. It's not my thing.
Did, in any time during World War II, or afterwards when you were in the reserves of the Air National Guard, did you feel like you were the subject of any anti-Semitism?
No, not at all. Not at all. If there was, it wasn't overt. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there was, but I was never directly confronted with it. I had what's called the Jewish antenna, you know.
What was that?
Well, at the 106th, and I can hear something on the side, but nothing directed to me particularly, and I just shrugged my shoulders and did my thing.
When you look back at World War II now, what stands out the most?
My D-Day mission and my Bastogne mission, that's all. That's all. And that flight with the Horsa glider, boy, that thing left me with memories. And and also, while I was at the POW camp, I heard about the German army sending in Germans that spoke English and wore American uniforms. The fact is, the first guy that interviewed me at the interrogation point was a Coca-Cola salesman from Ohio. He spoke English. He was an American, no doubt about it. Or at least he was in America since he was a kid. But I guess he joined the German army. He figures he's on a winning team. Where was I? I lost my train of thought.
Things that stand out to you.
Oh, and while I was at the POW camp, I wouldn't tell anybody I was Jewish. So when they had Sunday services, I joined the Sunday services. They had Sunday services. I remember singing Rock of Ages. Would you believe it? Rock of Ages. And I purposely didn't get close to anybody, figuring that somebody in that group, whether there was one or not, I'll never know. But I figured on a chance that there was a German soldier there that spoke American or English like an American-born guy, ferreting out information, who's who and what's what. So I kept to myself. I didn't make any close alliances with anybody. I kept my mouth shut, and I waited. So that's how I survived.
You proud of what you did?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Think it made a difference in your life?
Yeah. I appreciate life. I'm in the pursuit of happiness. And I don't take anything too seriously. I've lived a fairly good life and a lucky life, so I'm happy.
Anything else you want to add?
I can't think of anything.
Good. Thank you.
Okay?